Hello and welcome to the Third Sector podcast. I'm Dami Adewale.
And I'm Lucinda Rouse. Each week we bring you half an hour of discussion and debate about the important goings-on in the charity world. If you're a regular listener, you might have noticed that we took a break last week due to unforeseen circumstances, but rest assured that we're back and raring to go with an exciting summer pipeline of episodes ahead of us.
Today we'll be finding out how charities can make use of apprenticeship schemes to plug recruitment gaps and drive inclusivity. It's no secret that many charities are struggling to attract and retain staff or even afford them in the first place. A study by the Charity Finance Group late last year found that more than 60% of charities were considering reducing their workforce in response to the employer's national insurance hike. And this came while the sector was already battling soaring demand in the face of squeezed budgets.
But we're always on the lookout here for potential solutions and ways to ease the pressure that the sector is under. And so with us in the studio is Gary Laybourne, who is going to tell us about one such solution. Gary is the Chief Executive of Coach Corps, a charity that delivers sports coaching apprenticeships to develop the skills and talents of young people who may traditionally face barriers to opportunities. Hi, Gary.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Aside from being the chief exec of Coach Corps, you've also become something of a go-to resource for charity leaders wanting to find out more about apprenticeships and the opportunities that they present. Why do you think you've become that person?
I think it's twofold, really. Our operational model is very much about convening and collaborating. So we sit as this very rare and, dare I say it, unique beast that has no vested interest. We're a neutral body when it comes to it, which I'm sure we'll get into a little bit later. But that ultimately the trust since 2012, when we first launched our program, has been built. And since that date, we have grown from a single program in London through to now being 21 different cities across the UK, 350 different employers. So almost like holistically and organically, we have become this go-to, as you say, either for direct advice on the apprenticeships that we run, or increasingly it's just about wider advice on how to use particularly entry-level apprenticeships or recruit and retain Gen Z, and a number of different themes that can benefit a lot of businesses and charities.
Brilliant. And over the next 20 minutes or so, I'd really like us to kind of go down back to the basics of apprenticeship schemes and what they are and what opportunities there are for charities to make use of them. So first things first, what is an apprenticeship?
So we define it as a formally recognised qualification that takes place within the workplace itself. So it's on-the-job training, learning experiences that are then offset by also additional education, proper tangible qualification at the end of it. And so therefore there's a real business and development opportunity for the organisation that's hiring, but critically for the apprentice, the person that's going on that apprenticeship journey. They're going to get proper qualification, a number of months, if not years worth of experience and additional training and opportunities. And the types of apprenticeships will range from entry-level GCSE right through to rocket scientist PhD, basically.
And then there are different levels of apprenticeship. Could you tell me briefly what they are and what they mean?
Yeah, they follow numerical order. So from an entry-level apprenticeship where you really are GCSE, school leaver, 16 plus, and certainly starting on the first rung of a given industry, that will start you at level 2. We're currently with Labour government looking at now entry-level foundation apprenticeships as well, which is an exciting time certainly for us, looking at that, how we can transition those that need it most back into employment education. That moves up to level 3 at 2A level equivalent to level 4. Now we're starting a transition to kind of foundation degree level, and so on and so forth, right through to sort of level 8s and 9s, which is PhD type levels and beyond. So the actual ladder of qualifications mirrors that you would find in traditional education pathways. And helpfully, level 2, level 3, level 4, they all follow the same numerical progression point there. So you should, once you understand what equates to what, it's very easy to follow.
And I'm just making it more specific to the sector, Gary. Could you tell us what are some of the charity-specific apprenticeship schemes or qualifications?
Yeah, there's nothing specific to the charity or third sector world linked to apprenticeships, but there's a number of existing standards, as they're called, apprenticeship qualifications that lend themselves to our sector. So you've got the fundraising Level 3, you've got business administration, you've got event management, social care level 3s, mental health support workers. So there's a number of things that are designed to be able to be used in our sector and of course in other sectors as well. So there's, dependent on the skills or the type of individual you're looking for, there's likely to be an apprenticeship for you.
And are there specific institutions that run these schemes, or is it very much where you are in the country, look at your local training provider, they might be running apprenticeship schemes?
Yeah, very much so. So I think, first of all, in terms of charities, they're already ahead of the game in adopting apprenticeships that you can go and speak to and understand what they're doing. You've got national youth agencies, you've got the Salvation Army, the British Heart Foundation use retail, for example. But I suppose someone like National Trust is a great example. They're using, if we think of National Trust as we all know it, there'll be apprentices out tending gardens using conservation apprenticeships through to the shop and the retail apprenticeship that's there. And actually, even there's been coach corps apprentices in the past that have done the walking and the health and fitness lifestyle apprenticeships that come with National Trust. So there's a number of brilliant organisations already adopting them. And then in terms of, certainly to your question, Lucinda, the who is out there delivering, that can range from your local college, a small training provider, right through to nationally based training providers and colleges that can support you. The key question being, are they good? Are they right for you as a business? Because apprenticeships absolutely should be employer-led.
And you briefly touched on it there, but could you just tell us more about how Coach Corps is making use of apprenticeships?
Sure. The Sport for Change sector is an incredible way. I think we can all know and agree that sport does an incredible job of engaging young people, particularly those that are marginalised or underrepresented, to find something that engages with their passion. That said, certainly when we first established Coach Corps, myself and other head coaches grew frustrated that it wasn't leading actually to direct employment education, and that sadly sometimes there would be a number of schemes that would seem like that young person was going to get a job or even an interview, and that wasn't the case. And yet in the same breath, we as a charity were hiring part-time coaches and volunteer searches from major corporates, as many charities do. And that transient workforce wasn't working for us. And yet we've just spent 5 years developing and mentoring and supporting young people. This is our future workforce. Why are we letting them go and then going to recruit in different ways? So essentially that was the genesis of Coach Corps. And we use entry-level community sport and health apprenticeships at level 2, which is GCSE equivalents, and level 3. So no barrier to entry, allows us to really target the young people that feel passionate about sport and physical activity, but also equally feel passionate about putting back into their community. So all of our apprenticeships are community facing so that they can run activities, sports clubs, and be a real asset, not just to the local area, but actually also to their employer as well. So we're taking those off the peg qualifications, and our unique model of delivery is, as I mentioned earlier, we're convening the right partners, we're putting additional training experience and critically mentoring and personal support, which for those that are furthest from the employment market need. So we focus heavily on that to make sure that we bring them back to the workplace and actually allow them to realise the potential that they've had all along. And the model, as I say, is now we've supported over 1,000 young people into work and employment through our apprenticeships. And the national average is 57% completion rate. We're at 80%, and that's targeting who we target. So we know it works, and hence hopefully the growth will continue.
Yeah, it sounds really impressive. And putting on your charity leader hat, how, as a charity, if at all, are you actually making use of apprenticeships and apprentices for your internal operations?
It's a really good question, because if we were to use charity terms, our beneficiaries are the young people that we're supporting with 350 odd employers now to give that support to employers and also to young people. But absolutely, we started to ask that question ourselves, that we had grown from a single program with me leading it back in 2012 to an independent charity in 2020. And so once we had that opportunity to essentially steer our own ship, why wouldn't we want to create progression routes, either for some of the young people that have been on our program, but certainly for staff internally to engage with apprenticeships? So we have had experience of fundraising apprentices. We've got transition officers that are out on the boots on ground doing that support, that are also working on their apprenticeships as well. So we'd like to think we walk the walk as much as talk the talk as well.
And just really practically speaking, for example, your fundraising apprentice, what does their week look like? Are they spending a set number of days with you and then other time at a place of study, or how does it work? How do they look in comparison to your sort of standard employees?
Yeah, so if I do a bit of a reset, which hopefully then will will lead into how we adopt that as well. So there's some non-negotiables essentially when it comes to apprenticeships. A full-time apprenticeship model requires 30 hours a week minimum. A day of that can be education. So whilst you can do part-time apprenticeships, it's purely extending the duration. The duration is set and mandated by what was IFATE, but is now Skills England. And in terms of how it's delivered, the traditional model is exactly as you say, Lucinda. It's 4 days on the job with you, perhaps a day at college or a day with their training provider. So that can be built in, and particularly given that it's also mandated that 20% off the job hours, as it's called, has to be done within learning, and that is typically satisfied by the training provider. They need to be 16 plus to engage with an apprenticeship. And certainly for us and the types of young people that we're targeting and working with, it's critical to note that at level 2 and level 3, there doesn't tend to be a barrier to entry. So must have X amount of experience, must have qualifications, which to your intro tends to throw up some barriers straight away, particularly for people applying. Level 2 and level 3 apprenticeships, you don't tend to need that. That can even include maths and English. So going back to your question a second ago, Lucinda, you should absolutely be challenging your college or training provider on what level of support for maths and English are we going to get, and is our young person going to experience. The funding element for it can also be drawn down by government. So large costs, whenever you see the price tag, let's say, of a course, it's important to note that most of it, if not all of it, can be paid for on a drawdown via government levy. And then more towards kind of how we use it, we like to give real consideration to what that placement looks like. If we were to provide a single job and a single role and put them into a day a week of college, that goes against the entire genesis of why Coach Core in particular was set up. So we want to make those experiences, ongoing learning and development, extremely varied. We want them to feel and be part of the wider charity, to gain different skills and insights, to engage with their passions and the pathways that they want to go into, whilst also satisfying our own ambitions, obviously, for the role and for us as a charity. And then in terms of the education provider, asking those really tough, strong questions of them. How will you deliver it? What does the mentor look like? What do we see in terms of their progress? Is there an online platform and portfolio that we can judge and work together on? Again, you are in the hot seat here, and it's important that employers of all sizes understand that point.
It sounds as though then employers need to be very proactive when it comes to engaging, obviously, with the apprentice, but then also with the higher level organizer, provider of that apprenticeship scheme. What actually goes into taking on an apprentice? Would you say that it's like a big undertaking, like a large amount of work?
Yeah, look, I think that is certainly something that if you don't do your due diligence in the early days, it can absolutely be that. We are very conscious that many of the employers that we work with, my own experiences prior to setting up Coach Core were pretty poor. That, you know, a lot of the admin and the red tape was sat with me, that a lot of dragging that person to the finish line, again, was with us as employers. So I think it's the same as any other employment. We talk about apprentices as if they're somehow different to the rest of our workforce. The sooner employers start to realize that they are your employees, you will actually gain so much more out of this. So what is the motivation for you setting this up? If you look to put in place a poor experience, single focus, things like that, then expect to get poor results out of the back of it. So you should absolutely question and think before you even start to think about apprentices. Why are we doing this? Is it bluntly cheap labor? Is it that we have a junior role that we just want to fill? Is it that we've got staff members that are going to leave us if we don't progress them, so let's just stick them on an apprenticeship? There's a number of different things. So I think you need to ask those critical kind of W questions, as we call them. So it's, why do you want them? What will they own? Who will support them? And how will you keep them basically in your business short and long term? So what's the overall vision for them? If you set that out, that makes it very clear, obviously, as to whether an apprenticeship is right. And then critically, you should absolutely be demanding that of your training provider or provision to say, these are our goals and ambitions for this young person or for this employee or whatever it looks like. How can you support us on that journey?
And going back to Dami's introduction around the pressure that charities are currently under, the rising costs of having employees with the national insurance increases and so on. You did mention cheap labour as one possible motivation for bringing on an apprentice. Do you think that apprenticeship schemes could be a viable way of plugging gaps in payroll where charities are just really struggling to afford the people that they really need to run?
Yeah, I think so. Again, the motivation needs to be right. So, I mean, again, we look at the 5 key challenges that we see all the time is either businesses, organizations are still using poor or outdated recruitment techniques. So, for example, they'll say they want to take on a young, diverse workforce and will go about advertising it in the same places with the same methodology and doing interviews in the same ways. That has to have an overhaul. You've then got things like if you're working with particularly entry level roles, you're making assumptions that they are work ready and motivated to work. That again needs real consideration at the start of the journey. The same way to your previous question as well, Lucinda, like the time investment in the early days in particular can be quite a strain on the business. So it's coming in with real eyes wide open around those things. Financially, it's number one reason why people leave apprenticeships. If the wages are poor, if the logistics of travel haven't been thought through, how does that person get to and from the role? Particularly if your charity, your operations are multi-site and you're working out and about. So those things are really critical. But I think from our side, the reasons that we see charities really using them is if you're struggling to recruit in your normal ways, just by placing job adverts out there, apprentices can be an unbelievable solution, particularly if you've never considered them. Think of the mindset of that, particularly a young person that doesn't want to go to university. They want to earn while they learn, gain real skills and experiences. And as we're starting to see, will really question the world around them. So they're going to bring in real new diverse thinking and energy and insights to your organization if you give them that space. There's fantastic progression routes that are available. You know, again, demand to see what the education offer is on the course that you have chosen. Just because off the peg says something, one training partner will deliver it very differently to another training partner. So it's really important that you understand how they're going to deliver it, and more importantly, how you can lean in and get your own essentially bespoke offer around it so that they really fit the needs of the business as well. And then I think financially, to that last point, again, there can be a real asset. There's a number of ways that you can look at it. Yes, of course, economically, we would always encourage to make sure that employers pay national wage and that, again, the travel and the logistics are thought through. But actually, it's a fantastic way to engage with your corporate sponsors. You can transfer levy. You can gain placements and put apprentices working within their business as well as within your own. So there's a number of really quality reasons, economically, ethically, whatever you might consider, as to why certainly a charity of any size should look to engage in an apprenticeship.
You spoke about the work that the National Trust is doing, and obviously you're doing great work at Coach Core as well. So do you have any other examples of charities effectively making use of apprenticeships?
Well, we see a large proportion of the 350 that we work with are charity and setup. So from professional football clubs and it's their community trust through to incredible, inspiring, independent leisure providers in the community. There's a number of organisations that perhaps at first glance you don't actually realise are using apprenticeships. We're obviously a small part. For some, we're quite a large part, but in the main, we're quite a small part. We're part of the delivery element. So I would say there's probably a lot more charities and organisations out there that are utilising apprenticeships than possibly you think. And certainly one of the big, hopefully, takeaway advice is before you even consider it, or even if you're currently using apprenticeships and you feel that they're a little bit stale and or you want to see what else is available out there, go and speak to your peers. Your training providers will obviously want to sell you their business. Organisations like Coach Core, and there's a number of us out there that, again, have that no vested interest. We will happily give you our time to essentially guide you, let you know all of the warts and all truths about apprenticeships and what you need to be ready for, how you can make it the best possible experience for all parties. And then obviously for existing staff members, speak with them as part of their CPD plans. Is that something that's attracted to them that they've never considered before? We all know that things like masters qualifications preclude a lot of people because of its cost and duration. A higher level apprenticeship could be a fantastic way to re-engage in that way.
And you mentioned before transferring levies over to corporates. What exactly do you mean by that?
So in the UK, back in 2017, the government introduced the apprenticeship levy, which is essentially any organisation with a salary bill over £3 million will essentially need to give 0.5% of that bill to the Treasury. It's available for internal use. So for those huge employers that use apprenticeships or were incentivized to use apprenticeships, essentially their qualification, the price tag for the qual would be paid for by their levy payment. If you fall under that £3 million wage bill, which, let's be honest, the majority of micro to small, even medium-sized businesses will, then you are available to apply for that levy. So if we take BT, for example, synonymous with apprenticeships, they will spend so much of their levy, but because of their income and their salary, they can't even spend it on their own team. So that levy, after 2 years, becomes available via the Treasury. It goes back to the Treasury and is available for use. You have organisations that are then able to apply and use up to 95% of the funding. So in our world, the Community Activator Coach Level 2 is a £6,000 course. 95% of that is going to get covered, and that's done through digital drawdown, which any qualified and registered training provider can access, leaving the organisation with £300 to pay at 5%, essentially. Again, that though creates an opportunity. You can go to your own corporate supporters and ask for some of their perhaps excess levy to be transferred and moved over. These are all common practice things, certainly 8 years on now, that your training provider will be able to do very quickly, but is absolutely part of that due diligence on who you pick.
And how about thinking about small charities? In particular, they form the bulk of the voluntary sector. At Coach Core, you yourself are a smallish charity. Are there any particular opportunities that apprenticeship schemes present to those smaller organisations?
Great question, and probably one of the most common things that we support and get the really, we could do that moment. You can actually share an apprentice. So for a number of organisations that say, this all sounds incredible, we haven't got 30 hours a week, it's absolutely fine to partner up, work with another organisation and share those hours. Now, the critical thing being that the hours, albeit mandated, are still very much a guide. They're not that somebody is going to be looking over your shoulder and ticking off that you've done 30 hours a week. So if you and a peer organisation wish to share an apprentice, so long as there's one central contract held within one of those organisations and the training provider is made obviously very aware of the shared nature of the role, then you can absolutely embark on a fantastic shared resource for both organisations. Now, if I put myself in the shoes of the apprentice, I'm now learning from two organisations. I get to really broaden my skills and my horizons. I get to benefit and be part of wider culture and communities than just one single organisation. So there's huge benefits to it. The only thing, again, broken record time, is in your due diligence, are you setting that person up to fail? Is that peer organisation 100 miles from you? Is that peer organisation in a completely different sector to you? Or are you going to start arguing very quickly over who wants who on what day? Because particularly on entry-level talent, you need to keep things clean and simple and straightforward as you possibly can. But absolutely, we have seen some fantastic partnerships in our 13 years of two organisations partnering up and benefiting greatly from an apprentice.
It sounds like there are a lot of benefits that can come with taking on apprentices, but could you talk about the challenges of taking on apprentices?
Yeah, I think, again, I mentioned one of them earlier. We have an assumption that you've done, let's say, all of this incredible due diligence that I've banged on about today. You've got the brilliant training provider in place. Everybody is extremely excited, particularly for a first apprentice through the door, and nobody walks through it. I think the challenges that many organisations are facing either currently or potentially, if you were to look at apprenticeships, is again, how do you recruit and retain? Are you consulting with the people that you really want to target? So if, say, for example, you're an organisation like us that wants to create progression pathways for young people into employment, well, those young people are going to be the best people to talk to. Where would you look for in this role? What would you want from this role? How does a good interview look for you? So really spending that time to consult with them, to understand what their needs are and what an attractive position would look like. Because I think we're all very aware we're dealing with a generation of workforce that is very different to anything that's gone before. So just in general, we should be doing that as best practice anyway. I think also it's about that short and long-term consideration. Not enough people work on that, You will gain an incredible asset, particularly if you're a small charity. If you're bringing in someone with a single focus, you've actually wasted the opportunity. You need to be thinking about how can you progress them? How can you give them projects of responsibility that they will pick up the baton and run with it? How can you think about long-term and incentivize them to say, at the end of this apprenticeship journey, you will gain full-time employment if X, Y, and Z is met? So we, again, have seen this countless times where particularly young people become an asset to their business, set up something new, expand a project, bring new ideas and energy. I mean, 81% of our employers on our project said that the new energy and the new insights that they brought would not have been possible if they didn't bring in an apprentice. And this is at a, hyphen quotes, a junior level within the organization. So I think it's just around not fully considering the 360 of it, which again, I am fully aware takes time. I'm also very aware that particularly in small organizations, the investment of capacity in those early days can actually be a drain or be seen to be a drain on charities. But you have to understand the stronger the induction you can give and the more time and support you can give in those very early stages, very quickly. And again, we have seen this firsthand with some of the furthest from the employment market you could imagine. They will start to run and pick up and start to move through. So I would just say, make sure that you really are giving full consideration as to what their experience looks like and not just what you want as an employer.
You very generously said that you are open to questions from others working in the sector who may be considering taking on an apprentice. But do you have any go-to resources that you could recommend for people who perhaps know absolutely nothing about this, but think it's something that could potentially be of interest, of benefit to them, where they can get a real grounding in it?
Yeah, I would say even the smallest, most remote charities probably have more advice and guidance available to them than they probably realise. So from your government apprenticeship sites through to brilliant websites like Not Going to Uni, right through to those wonderful organisations that are around you and your charity that have probably got experience of apprenticeship. So your chair might be part of a major corporate organisation. It may be that one of the peer organisations within your network has taken on apprentices. You've just never asked them before. So actually, as ever, laying yourself a little bit bare, being very transparent, put a post out on LinkedIn, wherever it might be, to basically say, this is what we're considering, but we want to get this right. How could you give us advice and support? So from speaking to us directly, and getting in touch with us as an organisation or other organisations like us, through to asking an open question and see who comes through the net, I think you'd be amazed as to who will come through. And the element of challenge is also around community. We're working in a very different workspace now, where particularly middle to senior managers don't feel they need to come in 5 days a week anymore. Really understanding the impact of your junior workforce, I think, is something that many overlook, because they need mentoring and shaping and progression and development. And that can't happen if you're not physically there with them and supporting them a lot of the time. So yes, that's part of the consideration around what would that look like when you're employing potentially a younger apprentice. But actually also it goes for that wider point around, if you are working that way, there is no way around it. Are there other organisations when you're saying, look, we're considering apprentices, but we'd love them to be in a work setting? Can they go into, again, a peer organisation or a partner that you work with and learn from there? So prime example at the moment is even us as an organisation. We are working with an incredible corporate partner who have supported us for, it will be 10 years next year. And we are in their main office by Tower Bridge. It saves a lot of money in our rent line. We get to be obviously the beneficiary charity day in, day out next to those incredible human beings that support us within that organisation. But also critically for our junior members of staff that are joining us as apprentices, it's not just us that's shaping and developing their attitudes to work and the workplace. It's this bigger organisation too. So I think it can help in a number of different ways if you ask that question and look at it through very different lenses, as you as an employer, what the apprentice is going to experience, and potentially also how that might look and feel for your local community as well.
Sounds like that setup is very fortunate on many levels. So would you say then that for organisations that are fully remote, having an apprentice solely working for that organisation as opposed to one where they get more insight into a physical workplace is maybe not recommended?
We just know, I mean, again, I can only speak from our experience of the last 13 years. We are proactively targeting young people who are stepping into education employment, sometimes for the first time. We know through the various impact and data that we have run over those years that there is still no beating in-person community mentoring support, right? Having them feel a purpose and part of something. That is incredibly difficult to do remotely. So again, going back to the genesis of Coach Core, we don't want this just as an education and an employment experience, it needs to be about developing personal skills as well. I, on a human level, would also respond to that. I couldn't even envisage, obviously we all experienced it through lockdown, but I couldn't envisage a full-time job every single day working remotely, particularly when I'm trying to learn and develop, because otherwise all of my learning will take place digitally and online. I need to be able to ask questions. I need to interact with people, and particularly in a sport and physical activity world, there is no replicating it. That's why we are relatively AI proof. So we've got some good things, that we know work brilliantly. And so much of that is due to people. So again, to your question, Lucinda, if you are a charity that works entirely remotely, please don't let that put you off. But just think about solutions as where can that apprentice get that in-person contact? You are well within your rights to say this apprentice needs to come from this area, if that means that you are able to then go and have a coffee with them once a week or something like that. So again, you as the employer are in control of this. You set the brief, and particularly if you've really given thought to what the experience will look like, that is only going to enhance your chances of a successful hire.
Well, Gary, it's been wonderful and incredibly useful to hear all of your insights about apprenticeships. Thank you so much for joining us.
Not at all. Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed our discussion with Gary, and that's it for this episode. We'll be back next week to find out about some of the challenges encountered by the small charity STEM 4 in collaborating with other organisations by dint of its size, and how they've overcome them. And before we leave you, just a few words of encouragement to listen to our new limited series, When Charity Goes Wrong, if you haven't already. It's hosted by me and explores the regulatory and governance challenges that caused problems for Kids Company, the Captain Tom Foundation and Mermaids. It features people close to the action at each, as well as charity law experts and the Charity Commission's Chief Executive, David Holdsworth. You can find all 3 episodes on the Third Sector podcast feed. From the whole team at Third Sector, thank you so much for listening. Our producer is Nav Pal.